every New Yorker has a love-hate relationship with Times Square. Okay, mostly a hate relationship, to be honest. Most locals hate Times Square. But I always say to people who are New Yorkers, who are from here or live here now, that tourist areas in New York City are very needed because it really helps the economy in New York City. Even though people get annoyed by tourists when they're here locally, places like Times Square need to exist for Manhattan to really thrive. So where is Times Square? Times Square is in Midtown West, on the west side of Manhattan. And its most famous street, I would say, is probably 42nd Street. I would say that's probably the southern boundary of Times Square. And then it does stretch all the way up 7th Avenue. That's going to be where Times Square really is. Now, what is Times Square really known for? I'm sure you've seen thousands and thousands of pictures of Times Square. It's probably the most photographed area of New York City. What is in Times Square? Tons of shops, but like big brands that everybody knows. There's a lot of shops there. There's Broadway theaters. There is tons of restaurants, but not really local restaurants. It's mostly going to be also big names that you probably already know or maybe even have back home. Things like that are going to be in Times Square. And there are also some other tourist attractions as well. Now, I do think that every person, if they're coming to New York City, should see Times Square at least once because it really is incredible. There's nothing in the world, at least that I've seen, that is anything like Times Square. It's one of a kind, truly. But you will hear local New Yorkers get frustrated with Times Square because there's a lot of tourists in one area and it gets really, really crowded, and it's just not enjoyable to go through that area if you have to every day, or even the once in a while occasionally when you have to go through there. It's just not enjoyable. What can you do in Times Square when you come to visit New York City? Now, I would say that you definitely want to take advantage of the Broadway shows in this area and other types of performances in this area. That is, to me, what I would go out of my way to this area for is the theater. Even to this day, as I live here in New York City, that is going to be the main attraction for sure. I'm going to do a lot of separate videos focusing solely on Broadway shows, off-Broadway shows, off-Broadway shows, other different types of entertainment that you can see in New York City. So I'm not going to get too into it in this video specifically, but if you are going to Times Square, I would say pair that with a Broadway show if you're interested in that. That's something that you want to do. This is going to be the time to do it because it's all in the same area. Like I said, there are some other attractions here. There's like the Wax Museum that you might have seen pictures of. I have done that before. There's Ripley, Believe It or Not, is in Times Square. There's also the new Broadway Museum actually opened in that area as well. There are going to be some other things that you could do besides Broadway theaters here. And then you'll see a lot of restaurants, like I said, but not a lot of local restaurants. There are some that do exist intertwined in the streets of Times Square. Overall, it's going to be a lot of big box chains. I think they have the Red Lobster over there still, Olive Garden. You're going to see Applebee's. You'll see McDonald's, like places like that where you can go and get a quick bite to eat. However, I always recommend that if you're coming into New York City, that you take advantage of at least trying some local places in New York City because why not? There's so much great food here. And that's the one thing that a lot of local New Yorkers don't like about Times Square is that it really encourages so much of what you already know and what you already have back home that why not go out of your way to try something new? Now, I'm going to give you guys a little insider tip in this video on a place that is in Times Square that has a location there. It's a local New York City spot, and I highly recommend that if you're looking for a quick bite to eat, you go take advantage of this place because they just opened a Times Square location not too long ago, the past couple years. There's a place called Los Tacos that is in Times Square, and I highly recommend that you go out of your way to try this place. They have the best tacos, I would say, in New York City. I haven't had a taco that's better than this place, to be honest with you. This Los Tacos location is on West 43rd Street, so on 43rd Street between 7th and 8th Avenue. Just look out for that. If you're tempted to go to another like chain big box place, I highly suggest going to Los Tacos. There's also a ton of little like pizza shops that you can like grab a quick slice or something like that. But I would say Los Tacos is definitely something. If you're a taco fan, you should definitely give it a go. Now, how do you get to Times Square? Times Square is very, very easily accessible because it is a main hub of New York City. The easiest way is going to be probably, depending on where you're coming in from, via subway. So if you're coming in from Port Authority, Grand Central, or Penn Station, you can pretty much easily walk to Times Square from any of those locations. Port Authority will definitely be the closest. However, Grand Central is a close second, I would say. It's a pretty easy walk. I would say about a little over a 15-minute walk from Grand Central Station. Penn Station honestly might be about the same, maybe a little bit longer. You're just coming in from different directions. You can easily walk from any of these locations. However, if you choose to take a subway and you want to just go that route because you don't want to spend the time walking, then if you're going to 42nd Street, so if you're getting off at that station, you can easily take a subway at either one or two stops, depending on where you're coming in from. Port Authority is the only one where you're literally right on top of Times Square. You just need to walk down one block. You don't need to take a subway at all. That is going to be how you get to Times Square. Honestly, I think every train on the west side stops in Times Square pretty much. Most trains at least. Now, should you stay in a hotel in Times Square? Now, there are a lot of really great places to stay in Times Square. I actually have never personally stayed in Times Square. I have stayed in hotels in and around all of New York City, but I haven't stayed specifically in Times Square, and that's probably because it's very, very, very pricey. Now, some people like to be in all the action, and therefore they would prefer to stay in Times Square. But at the same time, I do think that there are a lot of other neighborhoods that aren't too far from Times Square that you could take advantage of. You could really stay anywhere in Midtown. Hell's Kitchen is a neighborhood right right outside of Times Square. You can go over to the west side of 59th Street. That area is also very, very nice because you're overlooking Central Park. So honestly, it might not be that much cheaper. But if you do want to get cheaper, you can go towards Penn Station, that area. So going towards 34th Street, like Herald Square, Fashion District area of New York City. It's going to be a place where you could technically walk or at least take just one subway or 2 stops, depending on where you're going, to get back to the action of Times Square. Those areas are definitely towards 34th Street. It's going to be cheaper, I would say, than staying directly in Times Square. For the most part, everything's a give and take, and sometimes you can't really predict these rates. For the most part, if I was trying to stay around Times Square, I probably wouldn't stay directly in Times Square unless I had a crazy budget and just didn't really care or found a really good deal. I would probably stay around there. So if you stay on 42nd Street but keep going all the way west, there are actually some hotels in that area that probably do have better prices than being directly in Times Square, and it's a very, very easy walk. And honestly, if you can, sometimes I do recommend walking around the city because it really does kind of give you a different experience of New York City that you don't really get by going through the subways or just being in a taxi all the time or something like that. I think that there's nothing like walking around Manhattan, and even to this day, honestly, I try to do it as much as I can just because I actually like doing it. Now, something else to note is that I also do recommend that if you can, try staying Times Square at night because although it is amazing during the day as well, I feel like you really get the full experience of Times Square at night because that's when, especially with all the lights and everything going on and it's dark outside, that's when it really comes alive, I would say. So if you can, try to schedule when you're there around at night so you at least can see it then. What I generally want you guys to take away from this video is that I do want you to see Times Square if you're coming into New York City for the first time. I think everyone should see it. But at the same time, I want you to understand too that there's so much more to the city than Times Square. I feel like sometimes people come into New York and literally just stay in that area and don't explore anything outside of it. And just Manhattan alone has so much more to offer than Times Square. So I do think that everyone should see it, but I think that they should also be able to see other areas and realize there's so much more to the city. But I also want you guys to take advantage of local spots that are even around Times Square, in that area, and don't feel like you have to just go to Olive Garden or Red Lobster just because you know those places and it's comfortable. I know that's very, very tempting to do that, especially when you're in a big place that you just know nothing about. But I promise you, you won't regret trying these new places that are local places here in New York City. So if you guys have anything to add about Times Square, or if you have any other questions, please leave them in the comments because as always, I love hearing from you guys.